In a bustling luxury department store, a wealthy woman's world shatters in seconds. She slaps a young black boy after a minor accident, silencing the lively hum of the store. But when the boy cries out, "My dad is your boss," everything stops. The once confident woman freezes in terror, realizing she's crossed a line that could destroy her career and reputation. Onlookers whisper, store staff shuffle nervously, and the boy's father, a powerful executive, is just upstairs. What will happen when the father learns the truth? How far will she go to cover up her mistake, and can she face the storm she's unleashed? The stakes couldn't be higher, and her next move will change everything. Will justice be served, or will pride and power clash in an unforgettable showdown? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Jackie Sterling's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of Mason & Noble's department store as she stepped through the revolving doors. The morning sun caught the gold fixtures of the grand lobby, casting a warm glow that seemed to announce her arrival. Her designer suit, perfectly tailored in charcoal gray, made as much of a statement as the determined look in her dark eyes. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," a young sales associate said, practically bowing as Jackie passed. Other employees quickly straightened their postures, adjusting their name tags and smoothing their uniforms. "Morning," Jackie replied curtly, her attention already focused on her phone. The morning's sales reports needed her review, and she had 3 meetings before lunch. The lobby's peaceful quiet was interrupted by the sound of excited footsteps and a child's delighted gasp. "Dad, look at all the Christmas decorations. They're so pretty." 7-year-old Caleb Blackwell pointed at the towering Christmas tree that dominated the center of the lobby, its silver and gold ornaments twinkling under the crystal chandelier. Ricardo Blackwell smiled down at his son, adjusting his tie as they walked. "They are beautiful, aren't they? Now remember what we talked about. I have a quick meeting upstairs, but it shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. "I know, Dad. Stay where you can see me when you come down," Caleb recited, his brown eyes still fixed on the decorations. His small hand held tight to his father's larger one. "That's right. Be good, okay?" Ricardo squeezed his son's hand before letting go. He checked his watch and headed toward the elevator, his confident stride matching the crisp lines of his business suit. In the accessory section, Jackie examined a crocodile skin handbag with critical eyes. 2 salespeople hovered nearby, eager to assist. "The stitching on last season's model was better," she murmured, running a manicured finger along the seam. The salespeople exchanged nervous glances. "Ms. Sterling, this is from our exclusive Italian collection," one of them offered hesitantly. Jackie responded, already losing interest. Her eyes drifted to another display. Meanwhile, Caleb had wandered toward a brightly colored sign advertising the toy department. His face lit up at the sight of model trains in a window display. "Wow," he whispered, pressing his small hands against the glass. The contrast between their worlds couldn't have been starker. Jackie in her designer outfit discussing $1,000 handbags, while Caleb's well-worn sneakers squeaked against the floor as he admired toy trains. At the cafe counter, Jackie balanced her phone between her ear and shoulder while waiting for her drink. "No, tell them the meeting has to be moved up," she instructed her assistant. "I don't care if they're flying in from London. This needs to be handled today." "Your iced coffee, Miss Sterling," the barista announced, sliding the drink across the counter. Just as Jackie reached for it, a small body collided with her legs. Caleb had been walking backward, still staring at the toy display when he bumped into her. The coffee wobbled but didn't spill. "Oh, I'm sorry," Caleb said immediately, his eyes wide with concern. "I wasn't looking where I was going." Jackie's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together for a moment, her lips tightening. She caught herself quickly, smoothing her expression into something more neutral. "Just be more careful," she said, her tone clipped but controlled. "I will," Caleb promised earnestly, offering her a bright smile that contrasted sharply with her cool demeanor. The phone call ended abruptly as Jackie's assistant hung up, leaving her even more irritated than before. Her temples throbbed with the beginning of a headache. The quarterly reports were due. 3 major clients were threatening to pull their accounts, and now her entire morning schedule was in chaos. She lifted the iced coffee to her lips, desperate for the caffeine, when something crashed into her elbow. The cold liquid exploded across her cream-colored silk blouse, ice cubes clattering to the marble floor. Caleb had tried to squeeze past her to get to a display of holiday cookies, but the space had been too tight. "I'm so sorry." Caleb's eyes went wide with horror as he watched the brown stains spread across Jackie's expensive clothes. Something in Jackie snapped. The pressure of the morning, the ruined blouse, the constant interruptions. It all came to a head in one terrible moment. Without thinking, she whirled around and slapped Caleb hard across his face, the sharp crack echoing through the suddenly silent cafe area. Gasps rippled through the growing crowd of onlookers. A woman clutched her shopping bags to her chest. A barista dropped a metal spoon, the clatter unnaturally loud in the stunned quiet. Caleb's small hand went to his reddening cheek, his lower lip trembling. Tears welled up in his big brown eyes as the shock of what happened registered on his young face. That hurt," he whimpered, his voice breaking. Then the tears spilled over, running down his face as he began to sob. "My dad," he hiccuped between sobs. "My dad is your boss." The color drained from Jackie's face as the implications of what she'd done crashed over her. Her hand, the one that had struck Caleb, began to shake. She stared at it as if it belonged to someone else, someone capable of hitting a child. The morning's frustrations evaporated, replaced by a cold horror that settled in her stomach like lead. The crowd had grown larger, phones appearing in people's hands. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "Did you see that? She hit that poor little boy. Someone call security." Jackie's perfectly maintained composure crumbled. Her breathing became shallow as panic set in. 2 security guards in dark uniforms appeared at the edge of the crowd, moving carefully toward the scene. A store manager in a tailored suit hurried forward, gently placing herself between Jackie and the crying child. "Come here, sweetheart," the manager said softly to Caleb, drawing him away from Jackie. "Let's get you somewhere quiet and find your father." Jackie's legs finally unfroze. Without a word, she turned and fled, her heels clicking rapidly against the floor as she pushed through the crowd. Behind her, she could hear Caleb's continued sobs and the murmurs of the shocked customers. She didn't stop until she reached the revolving doors, practically throwing herself through them into the crisp morning air. The security guards watched her go but made no move to stop her. Their priority was clearly the welfare of the crying child, rather than pursuing the fleeing executive. The store manager had already led Caleb toward a quiet corner of the cafe, speaking soothingly to him as she dabbed at his tears with a napkin. Jackie paced in the private office she'd commandeered, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, nearly dropping it twice before managing to dial her assistant's number. "Sarah, listen carefully," she snapped as soon as the call connected. "Get hold of the store manager immediately. This needs to be contained." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the panic beneath her commanding tone. "Ms. Sterling, I've already heard about the incident," Sarah replied cautiously. "It's spreading through the building." "Then stop it from spreading further." Jackie ran her fingers through her perfectly styled hair, messing it up without caring. This is just a misunderstanding that needs to be handled quietly. The reality of what she'd done was starting to sink in. Not just hitting a child, which was bad enough, but hitting Ricardo Blackwell's son. Ricardo, who sat on the board of directors. Ricardo, who could end her career with a single phone call. Meanwhile, in the store manager's office, Caleb sat in an oversized leather chair, his feet barely touching the ground. His sobs had quieted to occasional sniffles, but his cheek still bore a pink mark from Jackie's hand. The store manager, Mrs. Chen, offered him another tissue and a glass of water. The door opened and Maria Flores, Ricardo's assistant, rushed in. Her face softened with concern as she saw Caleb's tear-stained face. "Oh, mi cielo," she said gently, kneeling beside his chair. "Are you okay?" Caleb nodded bravely, though his lower lip still trembled. "Jackie Sterling hit me," he said in a small voice. Mrs. Chen winced at the name, having hoped to avoid mentioning the executive directly. "We're taking good care of him," she said quickly. "Perhaps we could—" "Ricardo needs to know exactly what happened," Maria interrupted firmly, her hand protectively on Caleb's shoulder. Her eyes met Mrs. Chen's with a look that brooked no argument. Outside the store's grand entrance, Jackie hurried toward her waiting car, sunglasses now hiding her red-rimmed eyes. Every person she passed seemed to be staring, though logically she knew word couldn't have spread to the general public yet. "The office," she barked at her driver as she slid into the back seat. Her phone buzzed again, the 5th time in as many minutes. This time it was a message from her assistant that made her blood run cold. "Emergency meeting called by Ricardo Blackwell. All senior executives required to attend. 11 a.m. sharp." Jackie's stomach churned. She glanced at her watch, 10:15 a.m. The meeting would be in 45 minutes, and she knew exactly what it would be about. Her phone continued to vibrate with incoming messages, but she couldn't bring herself to look at them. In the car's tinted window, she caught her reflection. Mascara slightly smudged, hair disheveled, the coffee stain still visible on her blouse. For the first time in years, cracks showed in her carefully maintained facade of perfection. The guilt she'd been trying to suppress bubbled up again, along with a familiar surge of defensive pride. She was Jackie Sterling. She could handle this. She had to handle this. But as her driver navigated through Manhattan traffic, even Jackie couldn't ignore the voice in her head telling her that this time she'd gone too far. Jackie's corner office buzzed with activity as she fielded yet another call from a concerned board member. The morning's incident had spread through the company like wildfire, despite her best efforts to contain it. "I assure you, Charles, this has been blown completely out of proportion," Jackie said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It was merely a misunderstanding with a child who was running unsupervised in the store." Her PR officer, Derek Thompson, stood before her desk, clutching his tablet. "Ms. Sterling, social media is starting to pick up on this. We need to release a statement." "No statements," Jackie cut him off sharply. "Quell any gossip. This is an internal matter that will be handled internally." Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the screen. The name Olivia flashed across it, along with a photo of her teenage daughter. Jackie's finger hovered over the answer button for a moment before she declined the call. Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Your daughter has called 3 times in the last hour." "She'll understand I'm busy," Jackie replied, though guilt flickered across her face. "Now, about those rumors." Meanwhile, in his spacious office overlooking Central Park, Ricardo Blackwell sat at his mahogany desk, reading the store manager's report for the 3rd time. His expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened as he reviewed the details of the incident. Maria Flores stood nearby, her hands clasped in front of her. "Caleb is still shaken," she said softly. "He's trying to be brave, but—" Ricardo looked up, his eyes reflecting controlled anger. "And you witnessed his condition immediately after the incident?" "Yes," Maria nodded. "The mark on his cheek was still visible when I arrived. He was crying, but more from shock than pain." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Jackie Sterling's reputation for being difficult is one thing, but this crosses a line. Ricardo set down the report and folded his hands on the desk. His voice was quiet but firm as he said, "Schedule a meeting with Jackie Sterling." "For when?" Maria asked, already pulling out her tablet. "Tomorrow morning, first thing." Ricardo's calm demeanor didn't waver, but the tension in the room was palpable. Back in her office, Jackie's composure finally cracked when the email from Ricardo's office arrived. She read it 3 times, her heart pounding harder with each reading. "Sarah," she called to her assistant, who appeared instantly in the doorway. "Did you see this? A full board meeting tomorrow morning?" "Yes, Ms. Sterling. Should I prepare your usual presentation materials?" Jackie laughed humorlessly. "This isn't that kind of meeting." She stood up and walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city below. "Maybe I should send Ricardo a note, explain my side of things?" Sarah waited silently, knowing better than to offer an opinion. After a long moment, Jackie shook her head. "No, I'm still the COO of this company. I won't grovel." She straightened her shoulders, but her reflection in the window betrayed her uncertainty. Clear my schedule for tomorrow morning and get me everything you can find about Ricardo's voting influence on the board. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jackie's luxurious penthouse apartment as she rushed to get ready. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened her pearl necklace, a gesture of composure she desperately needed today. "Mom?" Olivia's soft voice came from the doorway. Jackie caught a glimpse of her teenage daughter's reflection in the mirror. Dark hair pulled back neatly, school uniform already on, and a familiar look of hesitation on her face. "Not now, honey. I have a crucial meeting this morning." Jackie applied another coat of lipstick, focusing intently on her image. "But my science fair project is due tomorrow and you promised—" "We'll talk about it later, okay?" Jackie grabbed her designer briefcase from the bed. "I'll make it up to you, I promise." Olivia's shoulders slumped. "That's what you always say." Jackie paused for a split second, guilt flickering across her face, but the weight of the impending board meeting pressed down on her. "Tonight. We'll discuss it tonight." She hurried past her daughter, the click of her heels echoing through the apartment. In the company's imposing boardroom, tension hung thick in the air. Jackie sat straight-backed in her chair, surrounded by murmuring board members. Ricardo stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention without raising his voice. "Before we proceed with today's agenda," Ricardo began, his tone measured, "there's a serious matter we need to address." He nodded to Maria, who dimmed the lights and activated the projection screen. Jackie's heart hammered against her ribs. "If this is about yesterday's minor incident," she said, forcing confidence into her voice, "I believe it's being blown out of proportion. The boy ran into me." "We have security footage, Ms. Sterling." Ricardo's words cut through her explanation like a knife through butter. The screen flickered to life, showing the cafe area of the department store. Jackie watched in horror as the scene unfolded in crystal-clear detail, her coffee spilling, her hand rising, the unmistakable slap connecting with Caleb's cheek. The sound of shocked gasps filled the boardroom. I didn't mean..." Jackie's usual eloquence deserted her as the video ended. She looked around the table, seeing the disapproval in her colleagues' eyes. "This isn't just about a moment of lost temper," Ricardo stated firmly. "This is about judgment, accountability, and the reputation of our company." Outside the boardroom, Jackie stood frozen as Ricardo delivered his verdict. "You will cooperate fully with an internal review. Your actions have consequences, Ms. Sterling, both personal and professional." Employees hurried past, their whispers and sidelong glances making Jackie's cheeks burn. Her carefully constructed world of authority and respect was crumbling around her. Maria stood at her desk nearby, her expression a mix of sympathy and disappointment. Jackie clutched her designer bag tighter, her knuckles white with tension. For the first time in her career, she felt truly vulnerable, exposed not just as an executive who had made a mistake, but as someone whose carefully maintained facade had shattered in front of everyone who mattered. Jackie stood in the elegant hallway outside the boardroom, her designer heels sinking into the plush carpet. 3 senior board members, Thompson, Chen, and Martinez, approached her with concerned expressions. "Jackie, we need to discuss damage control," Thompson said, his gray hair catching the light from the wall sconces. "The board thinks a public apology would help minimize the fallout." Jackie's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. "A public apology? You can't be serious." Her voice carried the sharp edge she usually reserved for hostile takeovers. Chen stepped forward, her silk blazer rustling softly. "The public loves redemption stories, Jackie. If we get ahead of this..." "Get ahead of what?" Jackie snapped. "It was a minor incident that's being blown completely out of proportion." Martinez cleared his throat. "Security footage rarely lies, Jackie, and in today's world these things have a way of getting out." "Fine," Jackie said through gritted teeth. "I'll apologize to the boy, privately, but I won't grovel in public." The board members exchanged worried glances. "At least consider a prepared statement," Thompson pressed. Jackie's phone buzzed, her mother's name flashing on the screen. She ignored it, but it rang again immediately. Excusing herself curtly, she retreated to her office, the sleek space doing little to calm her nerves. "Mother, I'm in the middle of something," she answered, pacing behind her desk. Deborah Sterling's warm voice carried decades of wisdom. "Jackie, honey, I just heard what happened from Maria. What were you thinking?" "Of course Maria called you," Jackie muttered. "Mother, I don't need a lecture right now. Remember where we came from, Jackie? All those years I spent cleaning houses to put food on our table." "Stop!" Jackie's voice cracked. "That's not who we are anymore. I've worked too hard to get here." "And that gives you the right to hit a child?" Deborah's disappointment was palpable. "The Jackie I raised would never—" Jackie ended the call, her hands shaking. The sky outside her window had turned a deep orange, casting long shadows across her office. As she gathered her things to leave, Maria appeared in her doorway. Her kind face bore none of the judgment Jackie had seen all day. "Ms. Sterling, I wanted to let you know that Caleb's okay. The mark on his cheek has faded." Jackie stiffened. "I assume you've already told my mother everything?" "I care about both you and Caleb," Maria said softly. "He's such a sweet boy. A genuine apology would mean so much to him." "I don't need advice on how to handle this situation," Jackie said coldly, though her stomach churned with guilt. "Covering up our mistakes doesn't make them go away," Maria said. "It just buries them deeper until they poison us from within." Jackie turned away, pretending to organize papers on her desk. "Thank you for your concern, Maria. That will be all." As Maria's footsteps faded down the corridor, Jackie sank into her chair, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, along with the image of Caleb's tearful face. But admitting fault felt like admitting failure, and Jackie Sterling had fought too hard to allow that. Jackie Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Her phone was pressed tightly against her ear as she listened to her lawyer's cautious tone. "The internal review could lead to serious consequences, Jackie," her lawyer warned. "We need to consider all angles here." "Just tell me how to make this go away," Jackie said, pinching the bridge of her nose. Her reflection in the window looked tired, despite her perfect makeup. "Mom?" Olivia's voice came from behind her. Jackie turned to see her teenage daughter standing in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. "I'll call you back," Jackie told her lawyer, ending the call. "What is it, honey?" "I'm in the middle of something important." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Are you going to apologize to that little boy? The one you hit?" "It's complicated, Olivia. You don't understand the business implications." "Business implications?" Olivia's voice cracked with disbelief. "You hit a 7-year-old. How is that complicated?" Jackie felt her carefully maintained composure slipping. "This isn't something you need to worry about. I'm handling it." "Like you handle everything else? By pretending it didn't happen?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "You're just like you were when Dad left, acting like nothing matters except your precious reputation." Before Jackie could respond, Olivia stormed out, her footsteps thundering up the stairs. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the penthouse. Later that morning in her office at Sterling Ventures, Jackie was reviewing emails when 3 board members entered without knocking. Their faces were grim. "Have you seen the news?" Thompson asked, holding up his tablet. Jackie's stomach dropped as she opened her laptop. The headlines made her blood run cold. "Prominent exec in child assault scandal? Sterling Ventures CEO under fire. Sources claim top executive struck child in luxury store." She slammed the laptop shut, her hands trembling. "This is ridiculous. It's being sensationalized." "Jackie," Chen said softly, "we need to get ahead of this. A sincere public statement—" "I can handle this," Jackie interrupted. "We'll have PR draft something that puts the incident in proper context." "Proper context?" Martinez's voice was sharp. "There is no proper context for striking a child. The company's reputation is at stake." In Ricardo's office, the afternoon sun cast warm light across his desk as he studied the internal review documents. Maria Flores stood nearby, her hands clasped in front of her. "How is Caleb doing?" Maria asked quietly. Ricardo looked up, his expression thoughtful. "He asked me this morning when Ms. Sterling was going to say sorry. He said he knows she didn't mean to be mean. He shook his head. Even after everything, he still believes in people's better nature. And if she continues to avoid taking responsibility? Ricardo set down the papers with careful precision. Then the board will have no choice but to act. We're looking at removing her from key decision-making positions, possibly more. He sighed heavily. It's not just about the incident anymore. It's about judgment, character, and the values we claim to uphold as a company. Maria nodded solemnly, watching as Ricardo returned to his review of the documents, the weight of the situation evident in his measured movements. The morning sunlight streamed through the classroom windows as Caleb Blackwell hunched over his desk, carefully coloring his drawing. His small hand moved the crayon in gentle strokes, creating two figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "Hey, aren't you the kid who got slapped?" Tommy Wilson whispered from the desk behind him. "My mom showed me the story on her phone." Caleb's crayon paused mid-stroke. His cheek seemed to tingle with the memory, but he kept coloring, trying to ignore the comment. "Did you cry?" Tommy pressed, leaning forward. "I bet you cried." Mrs. Peterson, their teacher, noticed the exchange and Caleb's slumping shoulders. She walked over quietly, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Caleb, why don't you visit Ms. Garcia for a little while?" Gathering his drawing and crayons, Caleb nodded silently. As he walked through the quiet hallways, he looked down at his picture. One tall figure and one small figure, reaching toward each other with smiles on their faces. In the guidance counselor's warm office, Ms. Garcia sat in a comfortable chair across from Caleb. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, and soft music played in the background. "Can you tell me about your drawing, Caleb?" Ms. Garcia asked softly. Caleb held up the paper. "It's me and Ms. Jackie," he explained, his voice small but steady. "I think she can still say sorry. Maybe she's just scared to." Ms. Garcia's eyes softened. "That's very understanding of you, Caleb. How do you feel about what happened?" "My cheek doesn't hurt anymore," Caleb said, touching his face briefly. "But Daddy seems really sad and angry. He works late now, and sometimes he just stares at his computer without talking." "It's okay to feel worried about your dad," Ms. Garcia assured him. "Would you like to talk about that?" Caleb nodded slowly. "I wish everything could go back to normal. Daddy used to smile more." Later that afternoon, Caleb sat in the comfortable lounge area near his father's office at Sterling Ventures. His backpack lay open beside him, homework forgotten as he worked on another drawing. This one showed a big building with lots of windows, the department store where everything had happened. Maria Flores approached with a plate of apple slices and cookies. "How about a snack break, Caleb?" "Thank you, Ms. Maria," he said politely, reaching for an apple slice. "Want to see my drawing?" "I'd love to," Maria smiled, sitting beside him. She noticed how carefully he'd drawn each detail, how the windows seemed to sparkle with hope rather than reflect the painful memory of that day. From his office doorway, Ricardo watched the scene unfold. His son's resilience amazed him. Where adults saw scandal and corporate crisis, Caleb saw an opportunity for forgiveness and healing. The contrast between his son's pure heart and Jackie's cold response made his jaw tighten. Maria caught his eye and gave him a knowing look. They both understood that Caleb's innocent wisdom might hold more truth than all the board meetings and PR strategies combined. Caleb continued coloring, humming softly to himself, his small face peaceful despite the storm that swirled around him in the adult world. His unwavering belief in the power of a simple apology stood in stark contrast to the complex web of corporate politics and pride that threatened to tear the company apart. Olivia Sterling walked down the crowded hallway of her high school, clutching her textbooks close to her chest. The whispers followed her like a shadow. Groups of students huddled near their lockers, their eyes darting away when she looked in their direction. "Did you hear about her mom?" One girl whispered loudly enough for Olivia to hear. "She actually slapped a little kid." Olivia's cheeks burned as she quickened her pace. Before she could reach her next class, her best friend Sarah caught up with her. "Liv, wait up," Sarah called, touching her arm gently. "Is it true? The stuff they're saying about your mom?" Olivia's throat tightened. I don't really want to talk about it. But everyone's saying, I know what they're saying, Olivia snapped, immediately regretting her tone when she saw Sarah's hurt expression. I'm sorry, I can't deal with this right now. Without waiting for a response, Olivia turned and headed straight for the school exit. She couldn't bear another minute of the stares and whispers. Back at the penthouse that evening, Olivia found Jackie pacing the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. Designer heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she gestured animatedly. No, absolutely not. We need to control the narrative, Jackie was saying. I won't have my reputation destroyed by one unfortunate incident. Olivia dropped her backpack by the door. Mom? Jackie held up one finger, signaling for silence. Yes, draft the statement, but nothing too apologetic. We don't want to admit liability. Mom, please, Olivia tried again. Can we talk about what happened with Caleb? Maybe if you just apologized? Not now, Olivia. Jackie covered the phone's microphone. I'm handling a crisis here. Olivia's eyes stung with tears. You're always handling something, she muttered, turning away. She stormed down the hallway to her room, the door slamming behind her with a satisfying bang. Later that night, Olivia sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through her phone. Every news site seemed to feature the same story. Executive's violent outburst against child raises concerns. The comments were even worse. A notification popped up. Someone had tagged her in a post. Her stomach dropped as she read the caption. When your mom takes out her anger management issues on little kids. Several of her classmates had already liked it. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she closed the social media app. Her mother's voice still carried from the living room, endlessly strategizing with her PR team. The distance between them felt wider than ever. With trembling hands, Olivia pulled out a duffel bag from under her bed. She began stuffing it with clothes, her movements growing more determined with each item. Once packed, she grabbed her phone and opened her text messages. Grandma, she typed to Deborah Sterling, can I stay with you for a while? I can't be here right now. She hit send before she could change her mind. The reply came almost immediately. Of course, sweetheart. You're always welcome here. Olivia wiped her eyes, feeling a small measure of relief. At least someone in her family still remembered what really mattered. Jackie Sterling stepped out of her sleek black car, greeted by a burst of camera flashes. The children's charity event hall loomed before her, its entrance flanked by cheerful balloon arrangements that seemed to mock her tension. Her PR team flanked her like a protective shield, their tablets and phones at the ready. Ms. Sterling, over here, the photographers called out as Jackie plastered on her most winning smile, the one she'd perfected over years of public appearances. Sarah Chen, the event organizer, hurried forward to greet her. Ms. Sterling, we're so grateful for your presence today. Her handshake was warm, but her eyes held a hint of uncertainty. The pleasure is mine, Jackie replied smoothly, though her fingers kept fidgeting with her designer blazer. Sterling Ventures believes strongly in giving back to the community. Inside the hall, decorated with bright banners promoting children's welfare, Jackie's PR team buzzed around her like busy bees. They adjusted her microphone, touched up her makeup, and reviewed talking points one last time. Remember, her head PR consultant whispered, focus on the donation. Keep steering back to the positive impact. Jackie nodded, her jaw set with determination. She approached the podium, cameras tracking her every move. The room fell silent as she cleared her throat. Good morning, she began, her voice steady and practiced. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Sterling Ventures will be donating $5 million to support children's education initiatives across the city. Polite applause filled the room. Jackie allowed herself to relax slightly, thinking she might actually pull this off. Then a voice cut through the carefully orchestrated moment. Ms. Sterling, a reporter in the third row, stood up. How do you reconcile this charitable donation with your recent physical assault on 7-year-old Caleb Blackwell? The room went deadly quiet. Jackie's fingers gripped the podium edges, her knuckles turning white. She could feel sweat forming at her temples despite the room's cool temperature. That, she paused, forcing her voice to remain level, was an unfortunate misunderstanding that's been blown out of proportion by social media. The reporter pressed on. Multiple witnesses saw you slap a child in public. How is that a misunderstanding? Jackie's PR team shifted uncomfortably at the side of the stage. In the back of the room, several board members exchanged worried glances. I think we should focus on today's announcement, Jackie deflected, her smile growing strained. This donation will make a real difference in children's lives. The moment the press conference ended, Jackie stormed backstage, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. Her face had turned from composed to thunderous in seconds. How did you let this happen? She snapped at her PR team. You were supposed to screen the questions. Ms. Sterling, one team member started, we couldn't prevent. I don't want excuses, Jackie interrupted, pacing the small backstage area. This was supposed to fix everything. Through the curtain, she could see board members filing out of the hall, their faces etched with disappointment. One of them was already on his phone, no doubt reporting back to Ricardo. Within hours, clips of Jackie's defensive response were everywhere. Social media exploded with new hashtags. Jackie Sterling scandal continues and fake apology trended rapidly. Her attempted damage control had only fanned the flames of controversy higher. Ricardo Blackwell sat at his polished mahogany desk, surrounded by concerned board members. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across their worried faces. The charity event was a complete disaster, said Thomas Chen, one of the senior board members. Her response has only made things worse. Ricardo nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against a stack of papers. The public reaction has been intense. Maria Flores entered the office quietly, carrying a thick manila folder. Mr. Blackwell, the preliminary findings from the internal review. She placed it carefully on his desk. Opening the folder, Ricardo's expression darkened as he scanned the contents. The report detailed multiple instances of Jackie's harsh behavior toward employees, though nothing as severe as the incident with Caleb. Thank you, Maria, Ricardo said, his voice measured. He looked up at the board members. We need to address this situation before it spirals further. After a moment of contemplation, Ricardo turned to his computer and began typing. I'm inviting her to dinner at my home, he announced. It's time she apologizes to Caleb properly, face to face. The board members exchanged glances, but none objected. Maria stood quietly by the door, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Across town in her corner office, Jackie stared at Ricardo's email, her hands trembling slightly. The invitation was polite but firm, leaving no room for excuses. What should I do? She asked her assistant, Sarah, who stood nearby with a concerned expression. Ms. Sterling, Sarah said gently, this might be your last chance to make things right. Jackie ran her fingers through her perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly. The thought of facing Caleb, after what I did, she trailed off, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. After several long minutes, Jackie typed a brief response. Thank you for the invitation. I'll be there. That evening, Jackie's penthouse felt colder than usual. She watched helplessly as Olivia wheeled a small suitcase toward the elevator. Please don't go, Jackie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia turned, her eyes filled with disappointment. Mom, all you care about is your image. That little boy deserved better, and so do I. I'm having dinner with them tomorrow, Jackie protested. I'm going to apologize. Only because you have to, Olivia shot back. Not because you want to. When was the last time you actually meant an apology? Jackie felt tears welling up in her eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. Olivia, please. I'll be at Grandma's, Olivia said firmly. At least she remembers where we came from. At least she still has a heart. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Olivia stepped inside, her suitcase rolling behind her. As the doors closed, Jackie caught a final glimpse of her daughter's tear-stained face. Standing alone in her vast penthouse, Jackie felt something crack inside her carefully constructed facade. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to truly feel the weight of what she had done, not just to Caleb, but to everyone around her. Jackie Sterling stepped onto Ricardo's front porch, her designer heels clicking against the modest concrete steps. Her silk blouse and tailored pants felt suddenly excessive as she took in the simple, well-maintained home. It was nothing like her penthouse, yet something about it felt warm and inviting. Ricardo opened the door, his face professionally neutral. "Good evening, Ms. Sterling." "Thank you for having me," Jackie said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. As she entered the foyer, movement caught her eye. Caleb peeked around a doorframe, his small face a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. Jackie's stomach tightened at the sight of him. The walls told stories Jackie hadn't expected. Framed photos showed Ricardo as a young boy in worn clothes, standing proud at academic competitions. College graduation photos revealed a determined young man who'd clearly worked his way through school. During dinner, Jackie pushed her food around her plate, attempting shallow conversation about work projects. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her water glass. "You know," Ricardo said suddenly, his voice steady, "I grew up on Morton Street in the Bronx." Jackie's fork clattered against her plate. She knew that street. She'd lived there too, in the rundown apartments where her mother had worked 2 jobs to keep them fed. "That's..." Jackie's voice cracked. "I didn't know." "Maybe that's why you two are so good at business," Caleb piped up innocently, looking between them. "Because you both worked really hard." Jackie felt tears threatening to spill. She'd spent years burying her past, crafting a perfect image. Now it all felt like a house of cards ready to collapse. In the living room after dinner, Jackie asked Caleb for a moment alone. Ricardo stood in the doorway, watching carefully. "Caleb, Jackie began, her rehearsed apology suddenly feeling empty. "What happened at the store was unfortunate. I hope we can move past it." The words fell flat, echoing her pride rather than true remorse. She saw Ricardo's jaw tighten, disapproval clear in his expression. As Jackie left the house, her perfectly maintained facade felt heavier than ever. For the first time in years, she couldn't hide from who she really was, or who she'd become. Jackie Sterling stood in her penthouse living room, her designer heels discarded by the door. The city lights twinkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, but she barely noticed them. Her hands shook as she pulled an old shoebox from the back of her closet. Inside were faded photographs she hadn't looked at in years. Her mother in a waitress uniform, Jackie at age 10, wearing hand-me-downs, standing proud with a school achievement award. The tiny apartment on Morton Street where they'd struggled to make ends meet. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant. "Ms. Sterling, I'm sorry to bother you so late, but there's talk around the office about tonight's dinner. People are saying the apology wasn't genuine." Jackie hung up without responding. She sank into her expensive leather couch, the photos scattered around her like evidence of a life she'd tried to forget. The next morning, several board members huddled in a corner booth at the Daily Grind coffee shop. Their hushed voices barely carried over the whir of espresso machines. "The public response is getting worse," one member whispered. "We need to consider stronger action." Ricardo Blackwell's unexpected arrival silenced the group. He pulled up a chair, his face etched with concern. "The internal review isn't looking good," he said quietly. "And last night, Caleb could tell she didn't mean it. He said she seemed more worried about herself than about hurting him." "Suspension might be our only option," another board member suggested. By mid-morning, Jackie's office felt like a pressure cooker. Her PR team delivered more bad news. 3 major sponsors were threatening to pull out of next month's charity gala. "This is your job," Jackie snapped at her PR manager. Standing up so quickly her chair rolled backward. "You're supposed to handle these things." "We can't fix this if you won't show real remorse," the PR manager shot back. "People can tell you're just going through the motions." The PR manager stormed out, leaving Jackie alone. She stared at her reflection in the window, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Ricardo Blackwell's footsteps echoed through the hallway as he approached Jackie's office, a thick manila folder clutched in his hand. He pushed open her door without knocking. "We need to talk about what the internal review uncovered," he said, his voice steady but cold. Jackie looked up from her desk, her face a mask of practiced composure. Of course. Please, sit down. Ricardo remained standing. We have testimony from 3 store employees. They say you pressured them to stay quiet about the incident with Caleb, that you threatened their jobs if they spoke up. That's ridiculous, Jackie scoffed, but her hands gripped the edge of her desk. I would never… Stop lying! Ricardo's palm slammed against her desk. We have emails, Jackie. Text messages. Your assistant confirmed everything. After Ricardo stormed out, Maria Flores appeared in the doorway. Her kind face was etched with concern. Jackie, please, Maria said softly. Just tell the truth. A real apology could change everything. Oh, like you're one to talk, Jackie snapped, standing up. Playing happy families with Ricardo and Caleb, acting so perfect and righteous. This isn't about me, Maria cut in, hurt flashing across her face. You're destroying yourself, can't you see that? Later that evening, raised voices carried through the formal company lounge where the board had gathered for an emergency session. Jackie sat rigid in her chair, watching faces turn toward her with disappointment and anger. This behavior is unacceptable, one board member declared. We need to consider removing her from leadership immediately. Ricardo leaned forward in his chair. If Ms. Sterling continues to refuse accountability, there must be consequences. His calm tone carried more weight than any shout could have. Jackie's throat tightened as she looked around the room. These people had once respected her, even feared her. Now they watched her with a mixture of pity and disgust. The empire she'd built was crumbling, and for the first time she felt truly powerless to stop it. Olivia Sterling stretched in the small but cozy guest room of her grandmother's apartment. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the worn carpet. It felt different from the stark modern design of Jackie's penthouse, warmer somehow, more like a real home. The smell of pancakes and coffee drifted in from the kitchen. Deborah Sterling hummed softly as she moved around her modest kitchen, her gray hair neatly tied back. Did you sleep okay, sweetheart? Deborah asked, sliding a plate of golden pancakes in front of her granddaughter. Better than I have in weeks, Olivia admitted, picking up her fork. It's so quiet here. Deborah sat down across from her, wrapping her weathered hands around a coffee mug. Want to talk about how you're feeling? Olivia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I'm so mad at her, Grandma, but… She swallowed hard. I'm worried too. She's falling apart and doesn't even see it. Later at school, Olivia kept her head down as she walked through the crowded hallways. But she couldn't escape the whispers and stares. That's her, the one whose mom hit that little kid. I heard she's getting fired. The school guidance counselor, Ms. Chen, noticed Olivia's slumped shoulders and called her into her office. Things must be really difficult right now, Ms. Chen said gently. Olivia's carefully maintained composure cracked. I can't go back there, not unless she really changes. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She cares more about her image than about doing what's right. I can't watch it anymore. That evening, Jackie's sleek car pulled up outside Deborah's apartment building. She stepped out, looking pristine as always in her designer outfit, but her eyes were rimmed with red. Olivia? She called softly toward the second-floor window. Please, can we talk? Deborah appeared at the building entrance instead. She doesn't want to see you right now, Jackie. Mom, please, she's my daughter. And she's hurting, Deborah said firmly. She feels like you've chosen your pride over everything else, over her, over doing the right thing. Jackie's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the tears that began to fall as she turned back toward her car, finally understanding the true cost of her actions. The Sterling Ventures cafeteria buzzed with the usual lunchtime chatter, but as Jackie Sterling walked in with her designer lunch bag, conversations died like waves hitting the shore. She moved through the space, her heels clicking against the polished floor, while employees suddenly found their phones fascinating or became deeply invested in their salads. Jackie chose a table near the window, normally a coveted spot. Within minutes, the surrounding tables emptied. The isolation felt physical, like a bubble of silence surrounding her. A young junior executive, Sarah Chen, approached Jackie's table hesitantly, Ms. Sterling, I just wanted to say, she began in a whisper, but stopped as other employees shot warning glances her way. Sarah's courage faltered, and she retreated quickly, leaving her sentence unfinished. Back in her penthouse that afternoon, Jackie wandered through the vast, empty rooms. Olivia's bedroom door stood open, the perfectly made bed untouched for days. A school textbook lay forgotten on the desk. The silence pressed in on Jackie's ears like cotton wool. She picked up her phone, scrolling to her mother's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. Jackie started to press it, then stopped. What could she possibly say? How could she explain herself? The phone slipped from her fingers onto the plush carpet. That evening, in a corporate suite decorated with abstract art and leather furniture, Jackie sat across from representatives of the Children's Hope Foundation. She leaned forward, her voice earnest. "I'm prepared to make a substantial personal donation," Jackie said, pushing a paper with an impressive figure across the mahogany table. The charity representatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. The older woman, Mrs. Patterson, cleared her throat. "While we appreciate your generosity, Mrs. Sterling, we need to be careful about public associations at this time. 3 major sponsors have already expressed concerns about your involvement," added her colleague, adjusting his tie nervously. Jackie felt the familiar sting of rejection as another attempt to buy her way out of trouble crumbled before her eyes. Her carefully constructed world was falling apart, one piece at a time. Jackie stood in the doorway of her mother's modest apartment, her designer outfit stark against the worn welcome mat. Deborah Sterling's face was a mix of concern and disappointment as she opened the door. "Olivia's already left for school," Deborah said, her voice firm but tired. She stepped aside, letting Jackie enter the small living room filled with family photos and well-loved furniture. "Mom, I just wanted to," Jackie began, but Deborah cut her off. "Remember that cramped 2-room apartment we lived in? The one where you and I shared a mattress on the floor?" Deborah's words were sharp. "You used to say you'd make it big, but never forget where you came from." Jackie's jaw tightened. "That was a different time." "Different time, same values," Deborah shot back. "We might have been poor, but we knew kindness didn't cost a thing." Later, seeking escape from her mother's words, Jackie found herself at Pete's Diner, a small establishment she hadn't visited in years. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the smell of coffee and grilled onions brought back memories she'd tried to forget. "Jackie Sterling?" A waitress with graying hair stopped mid-pour. "Little Jackie from Brunswick Street?" Jackie blinked, surprised. "Martha?" "We were all so proud when you made it," Martha smiled warmly. "Neighborhood girl done good. You showed all those kids it was possible to dream big." Jackie's throat tightened as she remembered the community that had once celebrated her success. Back in her car, Jackie stared at her phone screen. 5 missed calls from her assistant, 3 from her PR manager. The latest headline read, "Sterling Executive Continues to Dodge Responsibility." Tears welled in her eyes as Martha's genuine pride contrasted sharply with her current reality. The leather seats of her luxury car suddenly felt cold and unfamiliar. Her carefully manicured nails dug into her palms as she finally allowed herself to feel the weight of how far she'd strayed from the person she used to be. The boardroom felt colder than usual as Jackie Sterling sat rigidly in her leather chair. Board members lined both sides of the long mahogany table, their faces stern and unyielding. The chairman cleared his throat, sliding a document across the polished surface. "Ms. Sterling, effective immediately, you're being demoted from your executive position, pending further review of recent events." Jackie's fingers trembled as she reached for the paper. "This isn't necessary. I can explain." "The board's decision is final," the chairman cut in. From his seat near the end of the table, Ricardo Blackwell watched silently, his expression a mix of duty and unexpected sympathy. In the hallway, minutes later, Jackie's heels clicked rapidly against the marble floor as she hurried away from the boardroom. Her vision blurred with unshed tears when a gentle voice called out behind her. "Jackie, wait." Maria Flores approached, her kind eyes meeting Jackie's. "Caleb asked about you yesterday. He still believes you'll make things right." Jackie's carefully maintained composure cracked. How can he even think about forgiveness after what I did? Because children see what adults sometimes forget, Maria said softly. That saying sorry isn't about losing face. It's about healing hearts. Tears spilled down Jackie's cheeks, smearing her expensive mascara. Her shoulders shook as she pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle a sob. Later that night, Jackie sat alone in her dimly lit bedroom, scrolling through her phone. Article after article condemned her actions. A recent piece showed a photo of Caleb at school, his bright smile unchanged despite everything. Her phone lit up with her mother's number and Jackie stared at it, her heart pounding. After 3 rings, she answered with a shaky breath. "Mom!" Her voice broke and the tears started flowing again. "Jackie," Deborah's voice was steady but gentle. "Baby, it's time to stop running. You need to make this right. Really right. Or you're going to lose everything that matters, including Olivia." Jackie clutched the phone tighter, her sobs echoing in the empty penthouse as years of carefully constructed walls finally began to crumble. Jackie Sterling woke with a start, her silk pajamas clinging to her skin. Scattered across her king-sized bed were coffee-stained papers and legal documents. Her phone showed 4:37 a.m., another sleepless night. Her bleary eyes landed on 2 urgent messages. The first, from her lawyer, warned of potential lawsuits from parents at Caleb's school. The second, a formal email from the board, scheduled what they called a final review meeting. Jackie's stomach churned. On her nightstand stood a simple silver frame she hadn't looked at in years. The photo showed a young Jackie, maybe 7 years old, standing with Deborah Sterling outside their cramped apartment building. Both wore secondhand clothes, but their smiles were genuine. Tears welled in Jackie's eyes as she touched the glass. Later that morning, Jackie slipped through the quiet corridors of Sterling Ventures like a ghost. Finding an empty conference room, she sank into a chair, away from judging eyes. Her hands shook as she dialed her assistant. "Sarah?" Jackie's voice cracked. I need a list of everyone I pressured about the incident. The store manager, security staff, anyone I tried to silence." "Of course, Ms. Sterling." Her assistant paused. "I'm glad you're doing this." Jackie's throat tightened. How do I face Caleb again?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. By late afternoon, Jackie found herself in Henderson Park, where she'd spent countless hours as a child. The rusty swings still creaked the same way. Children chased each other across the patchy grass, their laughter echoing off old brick buildings. A little boy in a worn jacket zoomed past, arms spread like airplane wings. For a moment, Jackie saw herself at that age, scrappy, determined, but kind. The weight of who she'd become crashed over her. She collapsed onto a weathered bench, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. The sounds of playing children continued around her, oblivious to the broken woman who'd forgotten where she came from. Jackie arrived at the Sterling Ventures boardroom 30 minutes early, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged her papers. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished table. As board members filed in one by one, their usual chatter died down to wary silence. Ricardo Blackwell entered last, his face composed as he took his seat at the head of the table. "The internal review is complete," he began, his voice steady. "We have documented evidence of multiple attempts to suppress information about the incident." Before he could continue, Jackie stood up. Her designer suit felt stiff and uncomfortable, like armor she no longer needed. "I'd like to speak," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I admit to everything. The slap, the cover-up attempts, the pressure I put on employees, all of it." Shocked murmurs rippled through the room. Several board members exchanged startled glances. "I accept whatever consequences the board deems appropriate," Jackie added, her shoulders straight, despite her vulnerability. After the meeting, Jackie stepped into the hallway where Maria Flores waited, her expression cautiously hopeful. For the first time, Jackie really looked at the woman who had tried so hard to help her see reason. "Maria," Jackie said, her voice catching, "thank you for trying to guide me. I'm sorry I lashed out at you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't try to hide them. Maria's face softened with surprise and relief. "This is a good first step," she said gently. Caleb still believes in you. Nearby employees whispered among themselves, clearly stunned by this new, humbled version of Jackie Sterling. Later, at a quiet cafe across the street, Jackie sat with her lawyer, who shuffled through papers with growing concern. This admission of guilt could have serious legal implications, he warned. Jackie stirred her untouched coffee. I understand, but I need to make things right. With Caleb, with Olivia, with everyone I've hurt. The legal consequences don't matter as much as fixing what I've broken. Her lawyer stared at her, clearly taken aback by this transformation in his usually ruthless client. I'll support whatever you decide, he said finally, but this is a dramatic change in strategy. It's not strategy anymore, Jackie replied simply. It's just the truth. Jackie's heels clicked against the polished floor as she approached Ricardo's office, her heart pounding. Gone was her usual confident stride, replaced by the careful steps of someone carrying a heavy weight. She paused at his door, took a deep breath and knocked. Come in, Ricardo called, his voice neutral. Jackie entered, noticing how different the office felt from this side of power. Thank you for seeing me, she said softly. Her hands twisted together, a nervous gesture she hadn't shown since her early career days. I'd like to speak with Caleb if you think that's appropriate. I need to apologize properly. Ricardo studied her face carefully, noting the absence of her usual polished mask. Why should I trust this request? He asked evenly. Because I've finally remembered who I used to be, Jackie replied, her voice cracking slightly. And that person would be ashamed of how I've acted. After a long moment, Ricardo nodded and picked up his phone. Maria, could you bring Caleb up, please? Minutes later, in the private lounge area adjacent to Ricardo's office, Jackie's designer suit crinkled as she knelt down to Caleb's eye level. The boy stood cautiously near the doorway, his small face serious but open. Caleb, Jackie began, her voice trembling. I am so deeply sorry for hitting you. There's no excuse for what I did. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. I was wrong, not just about the slap, but about everything that came after. I was scared and proud, and instead of admitting my mistake, I tried to pretend it didn't happen. Caleb watched her intently, his young face showing wisdom beyond his years. I forgot something very important, Jackie continued, her voice thick with emotion. I forgot that being successful doesn't mean anything if you're not also kind. You reminded me of that, and I'll never forget it again. From the doorway, Ricardo watched silently, his stern expression softening slightly as he witnessed Jackie's raw vulnerability. Caleb took a small step forward. Did you mean to hurt me? He asked quietly. No, Jackie whispered, shaking her head. But I did hurt you, and that's what matters. I'm so sorry, Caleb. I'll spend a long time making up for it. Caleb moved closer and, with the simple forgiveness of childhood, placed his small hand on Jackie's shoulder. It's okay, he said softly. Everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Jackie's shoulders shook as she struggled to contain her emotions. This child's capacity for forgiveness humbled her completely. In the corridor afterward, Ricardo walked Jackie to the elevator. The usual tension between them had shifted into something different, not quite friendly, but no longer hostile. This was a good start, Ricardo said carefully, but actions matter more than words. Jackie nodded, wiping the last traces of tears from her face. I understand. I won't let either of you down again. As the elevator doors opened, they both glanced back at Caleb, who stood watching them with a small, hopeful smile. The pure optimism in his expression seemed to light up the entire hallway. The evening light cast long shadows through Deborah Sterling's modest apartment windows as Jackie stood at her mother's door. Gone were her usual designer accessories and perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, she appeared softer, more vulnerable, wearing minimal makeup and simple clothing. When Deborah opened the door, she immediately noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor. Jackie's shoulders slumped slightly, her eyes carrying a humility that had been absent for years. Mom, Jackie said quietly, can we talk? Deborah studied her daughter for a moment before stepping aside. Come in. Inside the cozy living room, Jackie settled onto the worn but comfortable couch where she'd sat countless times in her youth. Family photos lined the walls, memories of harder but perhaps more honest times. I apologized to Caleb today, Jackie began, her voice thick with emotion. Really apologized, not just for show. Deborah sat in her favorite armchair, her eyes gentle but searching. And how did that feel? Like coming home, Jackie whispered. Like remembering who I used to be. She glanced at a photo of herself as a child, standing proud in front of their old apartment building. The board's still deciding what to do with me at work, but somehow that doesn't seem as important anymore. Moving to the kitchen, Deborah began preparing a simple dinner, the kind they used to share when money was tight. Jackie watched as her mother moved efficiently through the familiar space. Remember how we used to stretch one chicken into 3 meals? Deborah asked, stirring a pot of soup. Jackie nodded, tears forming. You always made sure I never felt poor, even when we were. Over steaming bowls of homemade soup, Jackie finally opened up. I've been so afraid, she admitted. Terrified of going back to having nothing, of losing people's respect. But in trying to hold on to everything, I almost lost what matters most. Deborah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. Real respect isn't in your bank account, Jackie. It's in how you treat people, especially when you've done wrong. I know that now, Jackie said, squeezing her mother's hand. I just wish I hadn't forgotten it for so long. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Olivia stepped into the apartment, freezing when she saw her mother at the kitchen table. Mom, Olivia said hesitantly, her backpack sliding from her shoulder. Jackie stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves. Hi, sweetheart. Mother and daughter faced each other across the room, years of tension hanging between them. Finally, Jackie spoke, her voice gentle but firm. I've been selfish, Olivia. I've put my image ahead of everything, ahead of you. I'm so sorry. Olivia shifted uncertainly, glancing at her grandmother, who gave her an encouraging nod. I heard about what happened with Caleb today, Olivia said carefully. That you really apologized. Jackie nodded, not trying to hide the tears in her eyes. I did, and I want to make things right with you too, if you'll let me. After a long moment, Olivia took a small step forward. I can't just forget everything, she said. But maybe I could come home for a trial period, if you really mean what you're saying. I do, Jackie promised. No more putting work first, no more caring more about appearances than what's real. Deborah watched her daughter and granddaughter with quiet satisfaction, seeing the first tender shoots of healing begin to grow between them. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Sterling Ventures' boardroom as Jackie Sterling sat before the assembled board members. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her usual confident posture replaced by one of quiet anticipation. Ricardo Blackwell stood at the head of the long table, his expression measured as he delivered the board's decision. After careful consideration of recent events and your apparent change in attitude, we've decided not to terminate your position, he announced, his voice steady and clear. Jackie released a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, but Ricardo continued. However, there will be consequences. You'll be demoted to senior vice president, and as a condition of your continued employment, you'll head our new community outreach initiative. Several board members nodded in agreement as Ricardo explained further. The program will focus on supporting underprivileged youth in our city's poorest neighborhoods. We believe your personal experience in these communities could be valuable. Thank you, Jackie said softly, her voice carrying genuine gratitude. I won't let you down. Later that day, Jackie found herself standing outside a weathered brick building, the youth center she'd visited countless times as a child. The paint was peeling, and one of the basketball hoops in the small court was missing its net. The sight stirred memories she'd long buried. Inside, she met Sarah Thompson, the center's coordinator, a woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. We've heard about you, Miss Sterling, Sarah said, leading her through the facility. Both the good and the recent? Not so good. Jackie nodded, taking in the worn furniture and outdated computers. I used to come here, she admitted. When I was young, it looks like it could use some help. More than just money, Sarah responded pointedly. These kids need role models, people who'll show up consistently, who'll prove they care. In the activity room, Jackie faced a group of curious children. Some whispered and pointed, clearly recognizing her from news coverage of the scandal. She took a deep breath and began speaking. I grew up just 3 blocks from here, she said, her voice slightly shaky. On Mason Street, in the red brick apartment building with the broken elevator. A few kids exchanged surprised looks. One small girl raised her hand. My cousin lives there, she said. The elevator still doesn't work. Jackie managed a small smile, feeling an unexpected connection. We couldn't afford much back then, but this center gave me a safe place to study and dream bigger. As she continued sharing her story, Maria Flores arrived quietly through a side door, pushing a cart loaded with art supplies and books. She caught Jackie's eye and gave an encouraging nod, her presence a reminder that redemption was possible. Some children remained skeptical, arms crossed and expressions doubtful, but others began to lean forward, especially when Jackie described her mother working multiple jobs to keep food on the table. One boy even raised his hand to ask about her first job, and Jackie found herself opening up about delivering newspapers in the early morning before school. The afternoon light slanted through the windows as Jackie finished speaking, her heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. She watched as Maria helped distribute the donated supplies, noting how the children's faces lit up at the sight of new notebooks and colored pencils. In their excitement, she saw echoes of her younger self, and for the first time in years, she felt truly connected to her roots. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jackie's penthouse as she stood in the kitchen, frowning at a slightly burnt pancake. The smell of coffee and maple syrup filled the air, mixing with the unfamiliar scent of her cooking attempts. Olivia walked in, her backpack slung over one shoulder, pausing briefly at the unexpected sight of her mother at the stove. "You're cooking?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of surprise and cautious amusement. "Trying to," Jackie admitted, managing a self-deprecating smile. "Though I'm starting to remember why I usually order in." She placed a stack of somewhat misshapen pancakes on the table, alongside fresh fruit she'd carefully arranged. Olivia sat down watching as her mother poured orange juice into 2 glasses. The gesture, though simple, felt significant. They shared a tentative smile across the table, both aware of the delicate nature of their reconciliation. Later that day, Jackie found herself surrounded by children in the youth center's art room. Paint bottles and brushes cluttered the tables as she attempted to guide an art workshop. Her designer blouse was spotted with yellow and blue paint, but for once she didn't seem to mind. "Are you the mean lady from TV?" a small boy asked suddenly, his dark eyes serious as he looked up at her. The room grew quiet, other children pausing their work to listen. Jackie set down her paintbrush, meeting the child's gaze directly. "Yes," she said softly. "I made a very big mistake and I hurt someone. I'm here because I'm trying to make things right and be a better person." The boy considered this for a moment, then nodded. "My mom says everyone deserves a second chance if they're really sorry." "Your mom sounds very wise," Jackie replied, her voice thick with emotion. As the afternoon progressed, the children's initial wariness began to fade. They giggled when Jackie attempted to paint alongside them, her corporate precision failing to translate into artistic skill. One little girl even offered to teach her the proper way to hold a brush. In the courtyard behind the youth center, Jackie sat with Sarah Thompson, the center's coordinator, surrounded by building plans and budget proposals. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across their papers as they discussed potential improvements. "These kids need more than just new equipment," Sarah explained, pointing to various areas of need. "They need ongoing programs, mentorship, consistency." Jackie nodded, taking notes with the same intensity she once reserved for corporate deals. "What if we set up a regular schedule of workshops, not just art, but homework help, career guidance?" Maria Flores joined them, carrying fresh coffee and her laptop. "I can help coordinate with local professionals," she offered. "Many would be willing to volunteer their time." As the meeting continued, Jackie felt a deep sense of satisfaction she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the familiar rush of closing a deal or seeing her name in business magazines. This feeling was quieter, more genuine, the simple knowledge that she was doing something truly meaningful. When she finally gathered her things to leave, her designer dress wrinkled and her hair slightly disheveled, Jackie felt physically tired but emotionally energized. The youth center's worn walls and modest furnishings no longer seemed shabby to her. Instead, they represented opportunity, possibility, and most importantly, hope. Jackie stood at the kitchen counter, carefully arranging fresh fruit on a plate while keeping an anxious eye on the toaster. The morning sun filtered through the penthouse windows, casting a warm glow across the marble surfaces. She'd been up since dawn, determined to make breakfast perfect for Olivia. "You don't have to try so hard, Mom," Olivia said softly, entering the kitchen. She wore her school uniform, her backpack clutched tight against her chest like a shield. Jackie's hands trembled slightly as she set down the plate. "I know, but I want to." She paused, meeting her daughter's eyes. "I understand you're still hurt." "I am," Olivia admitted, sitting down at the counter. "But I see you're trying. That's why I agreed to go to the youth center event with you this weekend." Later that morning, Jackie walked through Sterling Ventures hallways, her arms full of community outreach folders. The familiar click of her heels against marble felt different now, less triumphant, more purposeful. Employees who once scrambled to greet her now offered only brief nods or avoided eye contact entirely. Near the executive wing, Ricardo Blackwell stepped out of his office. He noticed Jackie's simpler attire and the lack of her usual entourage. "Those the youth center proposals?" he asked, gesturing to her folders. "Yes," Jackie replied, her voice carrying none of its former swagger. "We're expanding the programs." Ricardo studied her for a moment. "You seem different, Jackie. The change suits you." He offered a small smile. "I'm cautiously optimistic about where this is heading." In the youth center's meeting room that afternoon, Jackie sat with Maria Flores and Sarah Thompson, the coordinator. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows as they reviewed budget proposals. "I'd like to fund art and music classes," Jackie said, touching a finger to the paint stain still visible on her sleeve. "Working with the children here, it's opened my eyes to what they really need." Maria exchanged a knowing look with Sarah. "The kids have really taken to you," she said warmly. "They've taught me more than I could ever teach them," Jackie replied, her voice soft with sincerity as she spread out the scholarship program details across the worn table. The morning sun streamed through the boardroom's tall windows as Jackie Sterling stood before the board of directors. Her presentation materials were simple, just a few well-organized folders rather than her usual elaborate displays. She wore a modest navy suit, her demeanor notably different from the commanding presence she once projected. "The youth center needs more than just monetary donations," Jackie explained, her voice steady but humble. "These children need sustainable programs, mentorship, and real opportunities." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, exchanging skeptical glances. One spoke up. "Given recent events, is this the right time for such an initiative?" Before Jackie could respond, Ricardo Blackwell cleared his throat. "I've personally observed Ms. Sterling's work at the center. Her commitment appears genuine, and the potential community impact is significant." After careful deliberation, the board voted to approve Jackie's proposal, though with clear stipulations about measurable outcomes and quarterly reviews. Later that afternoon, Jackie and Maria sat with a group of teenagers in the youth center's multi-purpose room. The space was worn but warm, with afternoon light filtering through old Venetian blinds. Mismatched chairs formed a circle as the teens shared their thoughts. "We really need better computers," said one girl, her voice hesitant at first but growing stronger. "The ones we have barely run anymore." A boy in a faded baseball cap spoke up. "I saw you on social media, you know. That video where you—" He trailed off, watching Jackie carefully. Instead of tensing up or deflecting, Jackie met his gaze. "Yes, I made a terrible mistake," she said softly. I'm truly sorry for what I did, and I'm working to be better." The sincerity in her voice seemed to resonate with the teens, who nodded thoughtfully. As evening approached, Jackie found herself in a familiar setting, Mario's, a small Italian restaurant she'd frequented in her youth. The red checkered tablecloths and warm bread baskets hadn't changed in decades. She sat across from Olivia and Deborah, the tension that had defined their recent interactions noticeably softened. "Remember when you'd beg me to bring you here every Friday?" Deborah asked, smiling as she passed the garlic bread to Olivia. Jackie laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even her. "The owner used to slip me extra meatballs when you weren't looking." Olivia watched this exchange with growing warmth, her guard gradually lowering. The familiar aroma of marinara sauce and the gentle clink of glasses created a cocoon of comfort around their table. Deborah raised her water glass, her eyes twinkling. "To new beginnings," she said simply. As Jackie lifted her own glass, she felt tears welling up. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt truly present with her family, grateful for this chance to rebuild what she'd nearly lost. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the youth center's courtyard as Jackie Sterling and Ricardo Blackwell reviewed their checklist for the evening's community dinner. Folding tables lined the space, each waiting to be decorated with simple but cheerful centerpieces. "The scholarship program will focus on arts and academic support," Jackie explained, gesturing to a draft of the announcement poster. "We've already secured funding for the first year." Ricardo nodded approvingly, his stern expression softening as he watched his son, Caleb, dart between the tables with streamers trailing behind him. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, drawing smiles from the volunteers setting up chairs. "I never properly thanked you," Jackie said quietly, her eyes following Caleb's movements, "for giving me another chance when most wouldn't have." Ricardo turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "You've surprised me, Jackie. Watching you with these kids, seeing how you've embraced this work, it's not just for show anymore, is it?" Before Jackie could respond, Caleb bounded over, his face flushed with excitement. "Ms. Jackie, can I help put the flowers on the tables?" As evening approached, the center's front entrance buzzed with activity. Maria Flores stood at the door, clipboard in hand, warmly greeting each arrival. Board members in business attire mingled with local families in casual wear, creating an atmosphere that bridged different worlds. Jackie and Olivia welcomed guests together, their synchronized movements suggesting a healing relationship. Gone was Jackie's practiced corporate smile. Instead, she offered genuine warmth to each person who entered. "Thank you for coming," she said to a group of cautious-looking sponsors who had once threatened to withdraw their support. Her sincerity seemed to ease their uncertainty. Inside the main hall, the dinner got underway. The aroma of home-cooked dishes filled the air as people settled at round tables, sharing conversation over simple but satisfying food. Children's laughter mixed with adult discussion, creating a symphony of community connection. Jackie moved through the room with purpose, stopping at each table to speak with families. When she approached a small group of store employees, faces she recognized from the day of the incident, she paused, her expression sobering. "I want to apologize personally," she said to them, her voice steady but humble. "What happened that day was inexcusable, and I'm truly sorry for how I treated you afterward." Camera flashes punctuated the evening as local reporters documented the event. But unlike before, Jackie didn't pose or perform for them. Instead, she remained focused on her conversations, on listening to people's stories and concerns about the community. At one point, Caleb rushed up to show Jackie a drawing he'd made of the youth center. The warmth in her smile as she examined his artwork spoke volumes about how far she'd come from that fateful day in the department store. The youth center hall hummed with anticipation as Ricardo Blackwell approached the small stage area. The microphone squeaked slightly as he adjusted it, drawing everyone's attention. The warm lighting cast a gentle glow over the gathered crowd, their faces expectant and curious. "Tonight marks more than just the launch of a scholarship program," Ricardo began, his voice carrying authority yet warmth. "It represents a transformation, both for our community and for the person who made this possible." He paused, turning slightly. "Jackie Sterling, would you please join me?" Jackie rose from her seat, smoothing her simple black dress, notably less extravagant than her usual attire. Her steps were measured as she approached the stage, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. The crowd's polite applause felt different from the corporate accolades she'd grown accustomed to. "Thank you, Ricardo," Jackie said, taking her place at the microphone. She drew a deep breath, her hands clasping the podium's edges. "Many of you know me from the headlines, from that terrible day when I let pride and anger control my actions." Her voice wavered slightly but grew stronger. "I stand before you not as a corporate executive, but as someone who lost her way and forgot where she came from." The room fell silent as Jackie continued, her words carrying genuine remorse and hope. She spoke of her childhood in the neighborhood, of letting success blind her to what truly mattered. When she mentioned the incident with Caleb, her voice cracked with emotion, but she pressed on, acknowledging her mistakes without excuse. As applause filled the hall after her speech, Jackie lowered her head in a humble bow, whispering, "Thank you," before stepping away from the microphone. The clapping continued, punctuated by a few encouraging whistles from the crowd. Backstage, in a quiet corner behind the makeshift curtain, Olivia rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her mother. "Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you. You actually did it. You told everyone the truth." Before Jackie could respond, Deborah Sterling emerged from the shadows, her eyes glistening. "Your father," she said softly, placing a hand on Jackie's shoulder, "would have been so proud to see you tonight, standing up for what's right just like he always wanted." The mention of her father broke something inside Jackie. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pulled both her mother and daughter close, their embrace tight and healing. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen and accepted by the people who mattered most. Later, Jackie stood outside the youth center's entrance, taking in the cool night air. The city's lights twinkled against the dark sky, reminding her of countless nights spent chasing success in those towering buildings. The door opened behind her, and Ricardo's steady footsteps approached. "The board has noticed your changes," he said quietly, standing beside her. "They're talking about reviewing your position in a few months if you maintain this course." Jackie turned to him, a genuine smile crossing her face. "You know what's funny?" she replied, her voice peaceful. "That title used to mean everything to me. But now?" She shook her head slightly. "I found something better. Something real." The morning sun streamed through the youth center's art room windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn wooden floor. Caleb Blackwell bounced through the door, clutching a piece of paper to his chest, his eyes bright with excitement. "Ms. Jackie," he called out, rushing toward Jackie Sterling, who was arranging art supplies for the day's activities. "I made something for you." Jackie turned, her expression softening at the sight of the young boy. Caleb held out his crayon drawing with both hands. The page showed two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands beneath a vibrant rainbow. Above it, in wobbly children's handwriting, were the words, "A New Start." Kneeling down to Caleb's level, Jackie took the drawing with trembling hands. Her throat tightened as she studied the simple yet powerful image. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is beautiful." She opened her arms and Caleb stepped forward for a gentle hug. From the doorway, Maria Flores watched alongside several children who had arrived early for their art session. Their faces lit up with warm smiles at the touching scene before them. Later, in her car heading toward Sterling Ventures, Jackie sat quietly in the back seat, the drawing resting in her lap. Her fingers traced the crayon lines, marveling at how this simple piece of paper held more meaning than any expensive artwork in her penthouse. Her assistant glanced in the rearview mirror, noting Jackie's contemplative expression, and offered an understanding nod. In the afternoon, Jackie arranged herself in one of Sterling Ventures' smaller conference rooms. Board members and potential sponsors filed in, their expressions curious but cautious. Jackie placed Caleb's drawing prominently on the table before her, positioning it where she could easily see it throughout her presentation. As she detailed the youth center's progress and future plans, Her hand occasionally drifted to the corner of the drawing, drawing strength from its presence. The sponsors leaned forward, engaged by her genuine passion and the concrete improvements she outlined. "We're impressed by the direction of these programs," one sponsor commented, and more importantly, by the authentic leadership behind them. Jackie's gaze returned to the crayon rainbow, a symbol of the bridge she'd built between her past mistakes and her present redemption. The weekend afternoon sun bathed the youth center's main hall in golden light, transforming the usually modest space into something magical. Colorful streamers and balloons hung from the ceiling, and cheerful music played softly in the background. At one of the round tables, Jackie Sterling sat between her daughter Olivia and young Caleb Blackwell, surrounded by neighborhood children. "Your turn," Caleb exclaimed, pushing the dice toward Jackie. She rolled them with exaggerated enthusiasm, making the kids giggle as they bounced across the board game. "Oh no," Jackie gasped playfully as her piece landed on a penalty square. The children erupted in delighted laughter, and Olivia squeezed her mother's arm affectionately. Their easy companionship spoke volumes about how far they'd come. Ricardo Blackwell stood near the refreshment table, a content smile playing on his lips as he watched Jackie interact with the children. Gone was the cold corporate executive who had once valued image above all else. In her place sat a woman who had discovered genuine joy in simple moments like these. Outside in the sun-drenched courtyard, Jackie and Olivia helped organize the children for their special art project. A large white canvas stretched across several easels, bearing the title, "Our Future," in bold letters. "Okay, everyone pick your favorite color," Olivia called out, arranging paint trays while Jackie helped roll up tiny sleeves. One by one, small hands were painted in vibrant hues, cherry red, sunshine yellow, sky blue, and pressed carefully against the canvas. Each handprint added another splash of color to their collective masterpiece. Olivia guided the younger children, showing them where to place their hands to create a beautiful pattern. Deborah Sterling arrived just as the mural was taking shape. She pulled out her phone, capturing photos of Jackie helping a small girl in pigtails make her handprint. Tears of joy glistened in Deborah's eyes as she watched her daughter and granddaughter work together, their faces glowing with genuine happiness. As the afternoon light began to soften, everyone gathered around to admire their finished work. The mural blazed with color, dozens of tiny handprints forming a rainbow-like arc across the canvas. Jackie stood back, taking in the scene before her. Children chatted excitedly about their contributions while showing paint-stained hands to their parents. Caleb pointed out his handprint to anyone who would listen, pride evident in his voice. Near the courtyard entrance, Maria Flores and Ricardo engaged in quiet conversation, their expressions warm as they observed the gathered community. "She's come so far," Maria remarked softly, and Ricardo nodded in agreement, watching as Jackie knelt down to help a young boy clean paint from his hands. Laughter rang out across the courtyard as one of the children told a joke, and Jackie's face lit up with pure joy. The peaceful contentment in her expression spoke of someone who had finally found her true path. Gone were the designer suits and artificial smiles, replaced by paint-smudged casual clothes and genuine warmth that radiated from within. If you enjoyed the story of Jackie and Caleb, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.